Most people handle it the wrong way when an avoidant starts pulling away. Some react by blocking them out of anger, while others chase, plead, and desperately look for reassurance. But strangely, both reactions can lead to the same outcome: greater distance, more confusion, and less emotional control for the person who is chasing. The reason is simple. Avoidant dynamics are rarely changed through emotional intensity. They are changed through emotional regulation and self-control. There is one particular response that can completely shift the emotional dynamic, yet most people either never use it or use it in the wrong way. Before we go deeper, there is something important you need to understand. When an avoidant withdraws, it does not automatically mean their feelings have disappeared. Sometimes, the connection becomes emotionally intense too quickly, and their nervous system simply does not know how to process everything they are feeling. So they create distance because stepping back helps them feel in control again. The cycle becomes a problem when the other person responds with panic, anger, constant messages, or desperate attempts to reconnect. One person retreats, the other pursues, and the more one chases, the more the other withdraws. Eventually, the emotional gap becomes even wider. In this video, we're going to break down what may actually be happening beneath that behavior. You'll understand why blocking can sometimes eliminate emotional curiosity, why begging can destroy attraction and increase withdrawal, and why staying emotionally neutral can create a psychological shift that most people never see coming. You'll also discover the calm response that can change the way an avoidant experiences the connection without manipulation, pressure, or emotional games. So stay until the end, because the final part reveals a psychological shift that may completely change the way you handle an avoidance distance. Welcome to Avoidant Heart, where we explore relationship psychology, attachment patterns, emotional behavior, and the hidden dynamics behind human connection. Subscribe if you want to understand these patterns on a deeper level. Now, let's talk about blocking. Blocking an avoidant can feel powerful in the moment. You may feel like you're finally taking control of the situation. But psychologically, it can sometimes produce the exact opposite result. Instead of making the avoidant wonder about you, blocking can give them a sense that the situation has been completely decided, and avoidant dynamics can be strongly influenced by emotional certainty. When everything becomes final too quickly, there may be very little left for their mind to question, process, or emotionally explore. Remember, an avoidant may already be sensitive to emotional pressure. When closeness begins to feel overwhelming, their instinct is often to create distance so they can regulate themselves. If blocking enters the situation, they may experience it as another form of emotional intensity or finality. Even if you never intended it that way, they may interpret the message as "this connection is finished." And instead of fighting against that conclusion, they may simply accept the distance. There is another subtle effect. Blocking can provide emotional closure before the avoidant has finished processing what they feel. They may have still been thinking about you, wondering what happened, feeling attached, or quietly trying to understand their emotions. But when access suddenly disappears, the uncertainty surrounding the connection can disappear with it. And uncertainty matters. Not toxic confusion, not manipulation, not unnecessary drama, but simply having something emotionally unresolved can keep the mind engaged. When there are unanswered questions, the brain continues processing the relationship in the background. But when blocking makes everything feel completely final, that psychological loop can become much easier to close. This is why people sometimes misunderstand avoidant behavior. They assume that giving someone closure will automatically make them realize what they lost and come running back. But sometimes, too much finality simply makes emotional withdrawal feel safer. It can also reinforce an avoidant's existing belief that emotional closeness eventually becomes overwhelming, intense, or difficult to manage. So instead of creating curiosity, it may strengthen their instinct to stay away. Now let's talk about begging. Begging rarely creates genuine closeness with an avoidant. More often, it increases the emotional distance.
That does not necessarily mean the avoidant feels nothing. In fact, the problem can sometimes be that there is already too much emotional stimulation happening at once. When someone begins pleading for attention, reassurance, explanations, or another chance, the entire emotional atmosphere changes. Suddenly, the interaction feels urgent. The expectation becomes heavier. The need for reassurance becomes stronger, and the avoidant may begin feeling as though there is no emotional room left for them to breathe. For someone with strong avoidance patterns, that can feel psychologically suffocating. The instinct then becomes predictable, create more distance to recover a sense of emotional space. Begging can also activate a deeper fear, sometimes associated with avoidant attachment, the fear of emotional engulfment.
This is the feeling that another person's emotions are becoming so powerful that there is no room left for your own emotional independence. Your intention might simply be love. You may be trying to save the relationship, communicate how much you care, or get the reassurance you desperately need. But the avoidant may experience the same behavior as pressure. And when pressure rises, withdrawal often becomes their way of regulating themselves. That is why emotional control matters so much in these dynamics. The goal is not to manipulate an avoidant into chasing you. The goal is to stop feeding the exact cycle that keeps both people emotionally stuck.
There is another major shift that happens at the level of attraction.
When you constantly chase an avoidant, you can unintentionally remove the emotional balance that allows curiosity to develop. In these dynamics, attraction often grows in an environment where there is stability, emotional breathing room, and a certain amount of calm uncertainty. But when one person starts pursuing intensely, the relationship can begin to feel completely one-sided. The avoidant may stop experiencing the connection as mutual and instead start feeling like they are carrying someone else's emotional expectations. Over time, that imbalance can reduce their desire to emotionally engage. Begging can also eliminate the space where curiosity normally develops. When every emotion is immediately explained, every feeling is exposed, and every concern is repeatedly communicated, the avoidant has very little left to slowly interpret or process. Everything becomes obvious, immediate, and emotionally intense. And when the emotional atmosphere becomes too loud, an avoidant often turns inward rather than moving closer.
This is why emotional pressure can feel threatening to someone with strong avoidance patterns. It does not necessarily mean they are heartless or incapable of caring. Their nervous system may simply interpret intense emotional demands as a threat to their independence and sense of control. And when that internal control feels challenged, creating distance becomes their natural way of feeling safe again. This is also why avoidant distance is so frequently misunderstood. People see someone pulling away and immediately assume they're rejecting me. They've lost interest. They don't care anymore. But sometimes withdrawal is less about rejection and more about regulation. Avoidant people do not always verbalize that they are overwhelmed. Instead, they may communicate it through space. Distance becomes the method they use to lower emotional stimulation and regain their internal balance. When feelings become intense, move too quickly, or begin to feel consuming, stepping away does not always mean they want the relationship to end. Sometimes they simply need the emotional pressure to come down. Closeness can create a complicated experience for someone with strong avoidance patterns. The deeper they become emotionally involved, the more vulnerable they may feel. And if vulnerability is unconsciously connected with losing control, then increased emotional intimacy can actually trigger the desire to retreat. So their nervous system looks for relief, and that relief often comes through withdrawal. It is not necessarily complete emotional disconnection. It can be a temporary retreat that gives them enough space to understand what they are feeling without being overwhelmed by it. That is why distance should not automatically be interpreted as rejection. From the outside, it may look like indifference, coldness, or a sudden loss of interest. Internally, however, the person may still be thinking about the relationship, feeling connected to you, or processing emotions they do not know how to express. They may simply be stepping away because remaining inside that emotional intensity feels like too much.
Space allows their nervous system to settle. Once they are alone, the pressure decreases. Their thoughts become clearer. Their emotions become less intense. They can reconnect with their own sense of identity without feeling consumed by the relationship. This is why an avoidant may disconnect and later return. The bond may not have disappeared. The person may have simply needed distance to regain emotional stability. Once that internal pressure settles, they may reconnect, reach out, or become emotionally present again, sometimes leaving the other person completely confused because they assumed the earlier withdrawal meant the feelings were gone. Now, the first major shift you need to make when dealing with an avoidant is not something you say to them. It is something you change within yourself.
You stop reacting automatically. The moment you stop allowing fear, anxiety, anger, or confusion to control your behavior, the entire pattern begins to change. Avoidant dynamics are often maintained by a predictable cycle. One person pulls away, the other panics and pursues. The avoidant feels more pressure and then withdraws even further. But when that emotional reaction disappears, the cycle loses its fuel. This does not mean pretending you have no feelings. It means giving yourself enough space to feel something without immediately acting on it. You stop sending messages simply because anxiety tells you that you need an answer right now. You stop making decisions in the middle of emotional panic. That pause between feeling and reacting is incredibly powerful. The second shift is letting go of the constant need to figure everything out immediately.
When an avoidant pulls away, your mind naturally starts searching for explanations. Why did they change? What did I do? Do they still care? Are they coming back? What does their silence mean? But constantly demanding answers can create even more pressure. And when pressure rises, avoidance often increases. If you force emotional clarity before the other person is ready to process what they feel, the connection can become heavier instead of healthier. They feel pressured, you become more anxious, and the same cycle begins again. Sometimes allowing uncertainty to exist for a while gives the emotional system a chance to calm down. The third shift is removing the demand for immediate answers. Urgency changes everything. It turns a normal conversation into an emotional test. Instead of allowing communication to happen naturally, it creates the feeling that something must be solved immediately. And that is exactly the kind of emotional pressure an avoidant may struggle with. When these three changes happen together, less reaction, less chasing for clarity, and less urgency, silence begins to have a completely different meaning. It is no longer silence used as punishment. It is not a strategy designed to make someone jealous. It is not manipulation. It is simply emotional regulation. And that kind of silence interrupts the predictable pattern the avoidant has become accustomed to. There is no immediate panic, no emotional explosion, no repeated messages, no pressure demanding a response. Instead, there is calm. And calm uncertainty can create something very different from emotional distance: reflection. This is where emotional neutrality becomes so powerful. Most avoidant dynamics are driven by contrast. One person becomes anxious, expressive, and reactive, while the other becomes quiet, distant,
and emotionally unavailable. Eventually, both sides learn the pattern. One pursues, the other retreats, and the cycle repeats. But emotional neutrality interrupts that system. Your responses become steady instead of reactive. You communicate without desperation. You remain present without demanding constant reassurance. Suddenly, the emotional environment feels different. There are no dramatic highs creating urgency and no emotional lows creating panic. There is simply stability. And when the nervous system is no longer receiving signals of emotional danger, the intensity can begin to settle. Emotional neutrality also removes the predictable reactions that often keep the cycle alive. When you stop over-explaining, stop chasing, and stop responding dramatically to every withdrawal, the avoidant can no longer rely on the same emotional pattern. But neutrality is not coldness.
It does not mean becoming cruel, distant, or pretending you do not care. It means refusing to escalate the situation. You can care without chasing. You can communicate without pressuring. You can be emotionally present without becoming emotionally dependent on their immediate response. And that is what makes neutrality so psychologically different. It does not fit the usual pattern. An avoidant may be familiar with emotional intensity followed by withdrawal, or pressure followed by distance. But calmness without demands belongs to neither category. It creates a pause. And inside that pause, something important can happen. Automatic avoidance can begin to give way to actual reflection. Because when you stop reacting from fear, the connection is no longer being controlled by the old push and pull cycle. Instead, both people finally have room to experience what is actually there. The dynamic begins to operate from stability instead of emotional reaction, and that shift can change what is happening beneath the surface.
Absence can have a unique psychological effect in avoidant dynamics, because people with strong avoidance patterns often feel more comfortable when they understand the emotional environment and know what to expect. When your attention, reassurance, and emotional availability are always predictable, there may be less reason for them to consciously process the connection. But when that pattern suddenly changes, their attention can change with it. The mind naturally pays closer attention to things that no longer make complete sense. When you stop chasing, stop reacting emotionally, and stop providing constant reassurance, the familiar pattern disappears. There is suddenly a space where certainty used to be, and that space can create awareness. The avoidant may begin wondering what changed. Why aren't you responding the way you used to? Why is the emotional access no longer automatic? Has something shifted inside you?
This does not mean you should deliberately create uncertainty to manipulate someone. The important point is that when you become emotionally grounded, rather than constantly available from a place of anxiety, the other person may experience the connection differently. Instead of predictable emotional reactions, there is now ambiguity, and ambiguity can encourage reflection. Normally, emotional pressure triggers more avoidance because it makes the person feel overwhelmed. But emotional absence is different when it is not being used as punishment. It creates space without demanding anything in return. That distinction matters. There is no confrontation forcing an immediate answer. There is no emotional argument they need to defend themselves against. There is simply room.
This is why calm silence can sometimes be more effective than emotional confrontation. Confrontation can increase pressure, which may trigger defensiveness or another retreat. Silence, when it comes from emotional regulation rather than revenge, removes that escalation. It gives the avoidant an opportunity to process privately. And when emotional certainty changes without the connection being aggressively destroyed, questions can begin to surface. What happened? Why does this feel different? Why isn't the other person reaching out anymore? Why is their emotional availability no longer guaranteed?
Those questions can create more internal attention than repeated arguments ever could. Silence does not have to push someone away. Sometimes, it simply changes the emotional environment. And when the environment is no longer predictable in the same old way, curiosity may begin to compete with automatic avoidance.
So what should you actually do when you're caught in an avoidant dynamic? Not a trick. Not a calculated move designed to make them chase you, and definitely not an emotional reaction. The real shift begins with changing your emotional position. You step back, not because you're angry, not because you want to punish them, but because you are becoming more aware of your own emotional state. That means creating a pause between what you feel and what you do. You may feel the urge to send another message, demand an explanation, or immediately fix everything. But instead of allowing that impulse to control your behavior, you give yourself time to settle. That pause can prevent the emotional escalation that keeps the push and pull cycle alive. The next layer is staying calm and consistent. Calmness does not mean you suddenly stop caring. It means your behavior is no longer controlled by every change in the other person's behavior. Your communication remains steady. Your tone remains respectful. You do not swing from intense affection to anger simply because they became distant. You become emotionally grounded. And that consistency is important because it creates stability without creating pressure. Then comes the removal of urgency. Urgency creates pressure. Pressure can trigger withdrawal. So when you stop demanding immediate answers, stop chasing reassurance, and stop treating every period of silence as an emergency, the emotional atmosphere becomes lighter. There is no longer an expectation that everything has to be resolved right now. And sometimes that is exactly what allows both people to think more clearly. But the deepest shift comes from focusing your attention back on yourself. Instead of constantly monitoring what the avoidant is doing, where they are emotionally, whether they will return, or what their silence means, you begin rebuilding your own emotional stability. You return to your routines. You focus on your goals. You take care of your emotional needs. You allow your life to continue, instead of placing everything on pause while waiting for someone else's behavior to change. That is where your real power comes from. Not from controlling them, not from making them jealous, not from blocking them, not from forcing them to miss you. Your power comes from controlling your own reactions, your own urgency, and your own emotional decisions. Because the moment you regain control of yourself, the entire dynamic begins to change. The connection is no longer being driven by panic and pursuit. You are no longer responding automatically every time they create distance. The old pattern starts losing its fuel. And when the predictable reaction disappears, the push and pull cycle becomes weaker. This is the part most people overlook. They think control belongs to the person who withdraws. They assume the avoidant has all the power because they decide when to come close and when to disappear. But their silence is not the only thing determining the direction of the relationship. Your response matters too. Every emotional chase, every desperate message, every angry reaction, and every demand for certainty can unintentionally reinforce the same cycle. That is why blocking and begging are often two sides of the same problem. Both can come from emotional intensity. One says, "I'm going to cut you off because I can't handle this." The other says, "Please come closer because I can't handle this." Different behaviors, but both are being driven by emotional urgency. The healthier alternative is emotional control. Not control over the avoidant. Control over yourself. Control over the impulse to chase. Control over the need to receive an immediate answer. Control over the fear that silence automatically means rejection. Once that internal pressure begins to disappear, the entire emotional structure can start changing. The push and pull becomes weaker. Silence becomes breathing room instead of conflict. down an opportunity for reflection rather than proof that you are unwanted. And uncertainty stops having the power to completely control your emotional state. That is where genuine change begins. You are no longer trying to force the connection into a specific outcome. You are allowing yourself to respond from clarity instead of fear. And when emotional reactivity ends, the old pattern can finally begin to reset. The result may not always be that the avoidant returns, and that distinction matters. Emotional regulation is not a technique for controlling another person's choices. It is a way of protecting your own peace, dignity, and emotional well-being while allowing the relationship to reveal what it truly is. If this video helped you understand avoidant behavior, emotional regulation, attachment patterns, and the psychology behind the push and pull dynamic, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Avoidant Heart. We create deeper content about relationships, attachment styles, emotional intelligence, and the hidden patterns that shape human connection.